So good day, my name is Arden Shibley. If you're new to the channel, I'm a professional drone pilot. I'm here with the ever-curious Vader, and today we are talking about some of the issues that still plague the DJI Inspire 2, even nearing 3 years after its original release. Jumping right in, the batteries. The DJI TB50 batteries are still a bit of a gamble. They're not cheap, at about 200 bucks Canadian a piece, and they're a risk a little bit just because sometimes they'll just error out on you, or they won't charge, they'll fail, and the error codes and things that show up on them are still a little bit ambiguous. And if they fail, you only have about 6 months to warranty them, and if they go down, it can be a little bit expensive to replace. The FPV camera on the Inspire 2 still totally sucks. That's not news. Really hoping for an improvement there on the Inspire 3 DJI, hint hint. Horizon and yaw drift on the Inspire 2, regardless of which camera you're using, is still totally a thing. The camera might drift to the left or to the right while you're not doing anything, and sometimes if you're using the camera, you can have a shot and your horizon is level, and if you pan around 90 degrees, suddenly your shot is all canted, and that's no good. I find leveling the horizon is easier if you have the roll of the camera mapped to one of the sticks on the second controller, and if you don't, you have to go into the menus and actually use this little button that you click, and it's stupid and it's slow and it doesn't really work to level the horizon, and it doesn't stay level if you're using a single operator, or if you're operating the camera as the pilot. You don't have an easy stick that you can just roll the camera from left to right, and you have to use this dinky little adjustment that just doesn't stay, it doesn't stick, it's not accurate, it's not useful. I talk about this in my next video, which is dual operator control with the Inspire 2. That will be right here when it's done. There are what are called vision sensors on the front of the Inspire 2, just like on the Phantom and Mavic series systems, that are made to detect obstacles as they approach, at least when you're flying forward. These sensors on the Inspire 2 will detect things that the Inspire may or may not actually hit while flying. Sometimes you'll be chasing a subject, or you'll be flying over some trees or a building, and it will detect the trees or the building and it will just stop. Now, I understand that it's better safe than sorry, but definitely if you leave this enabled, when we're flying, I've found that you'll be flying and you'll go to fly over somebody, or you'll fly over a building, and the Inspire will just stop mid-shot and you'll have to go back and do it again because of these sensors. So most of the time we just fly with them disabled. I'm still concerned with a little servo that is inside the Inspire 2 here that enables it to transform from what is travel mode, so it's this flat mode, into a flight mode or landing mode, something like this. It's not the quietest thing, but it moves the arms up and down, and this little servo can actually fail on you. So I know a cinematographer who was out traveling, and he was a long ways from any DJI service center, and that servo got busted when the case carrying the Inspire got tossed off of a vehicle, and it basically pooched it. So the only way, if that servo fails, the only way to transform it into flight mode or landing mode is to actually stick a screwdriver into that hole right there, and then you can screw it and change it. But if that servo breaks, you need a replacement servo, and the whole operation of the system relies on it, and there are a lot of people that have had that servo actually fail. Okay, I get it. A lot of people that have had that servo fail, and it will really throw a wrench in your operation. So another thing, when the Inspire 2 records to the SSDs, the metadata that is on these files is absolutely whack. Sometimes it thinks it's 1993. The Inspire 2 really has no idea what time and day it is. This applies to both the metadata on the video files and the file names, which include, let's say 2019-07-25 or something like that for July 25th of this year. The Inspire 2 will flip out of log mode randomly if you change a lens, let's say restart, or switch from video mode to photo mode and back to video. Sometimes you'll be shooting log because you're on a big production and there's going to be a colorist adjusting the footage after the fact, and then you'll go to take another shot and it'll be in linear, and that's no good. You want log in a lot of scenarios, and it would be really nice if the system could just stay there right where you put it. The system has been out for 3 years. These are really things that should have been ironed out in the firmware. Now up to the Inspire 2 itself, when you take a photo, the Inspire takes a minute to basically process the photo. It has to process that data and write it to the SD card, and while it's doing that, the camera is basically unresponsive. It doesn't show you what's in front of it. It takes a moment to process the photo, and you can't shoot another image. You can't shoot stills rapid fire, even though that's effectively what the camera's doing when it's shooting cinema DNG. I suspect this has something to do with the fact that it's writing to an SD card as opposed to the CineSSD, but it is a little bit longer than I would prefer. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the CrystalSky for DJI systems. First of all, the touch sensitivity of the CrystalSky is absolutely horrid. It is one of the worst touch responsive devices that I've ever used. It almost feels like a Palm Pilot or something older that you actually have to press to get it to touch, and it's worse if your fingers are cold, if the weather is cold, if there's a little bit of moisture, or if you're wearing gloves. It's awful, and whenever I introduce the system to somebody new, a camera operator or a client or whatever, and they're trying to navigate through a menu or pick which image they want to see in playback, it's just not responsive. It's awful, and I'm really hoping that this improves to a proper glass display in maybe the CrystalSky 2, I don't know, but that's one of the biggest points. The button response on these remotes doesn't always catch, and there's definitely a delay when you're doing it. You'll push a button and then you'll see something update on the screen. I know that's not directly CrystalSky related, but sometimes my camera operator, I'll say center up to have them center the gimbal to the way that the drone is facing. They'll push their C1 button and then nothing will happen, and I'll have to say, if they're not familiar with the system, I'll have to say hit it again because it didn't take. And sometimes you'll hit roll, you'll hit the record button and it won't start recording. You'll actually have to hit it again. Same thing if you try to cut. There's a disconnect where you have an input, a user input, and it doesn't always take on the Inspire. It might take a second try, and there's really no rhyme or reason for why. Another thing is there is no degrees adjustment for shutter angle. You have to choose your shutter speed in fractions of a second. If you were able to set 180-degree shutter and you changed your frame rate from 24 to, let's say, 60 frames a second, your shutter speed would change from 1/48th or 1/50th up to 1/120th automatically by itself. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the degrees adjustment, so just like the Sony a6500 that I'm filming this on, you have to adjust that shutter speed by yourself in terms of fractions of a second. Again, if you're trying to fit into a professional scenario, it would be really nice to have a degrees adjustment as opposed to just the fractions of a second. There are these errors that show up in the DJI GO app. If you fly a DJI system, I'm sure you're familiar with them. They could be for a gimbal overload, high wind, a battery error, some type of airspace. Basically, they show up on your screen, they're annoying, they're in the way, there's no way to easily get rid of them, and you have to hit this stupid little X, which is a problem that's exacerbated by the fact that the CrystalSky absolutely suck in sensing where you touch and when. And so trying to hit this tiny little X every single time you have one of those errors to get rid of it, to get it out of your way so you can focus on what you're doing, absolutely sucks. Please update this, DJI. The CrystalSkys overall are nice because you can replace the battery, you can run them in the cold, and they are brighter than an iPad, but they can be a little bit sluggish, especially when it's hot, and browsing through your flight logs on a CrystalSky is absolutely painful. In order to go through and do our flight logs, I actually upload the flight logs from the CrystalSky to DJI's server, and then I download them on an iPad where I can browse through and actually log the data into our proper flight log. When you are flying and it comes time where your battery is low enough that the Inspire wants to automatically return home. Again, all the DJI systems do this, but on the CrystalSky, when the battery is low and the Inspire wants to come home, the RTH notification that says battery is low, drone will now come home, it shows up in front of what you're filming and gives you a cancel and an OK button. Now, that might be all right if it's just my screen, but I'm flying, and I have a camera operator, and the warning will come up on my screen and my camera operators. Hopefully I'm not doing something that I can't take my hands off the controls, but I have to take my hands off the controls and hit cancel. You used to be able to hit one of the C buttons on the bottom of the controller to dismiss this warning, but you have to hit cancel in order to get it to go away and to stop it from RTHing mid-shot if you're shooting on that low end of the battery. There is one benefit. It used to show up twice. You would cancel it and then it would go away for a second. It would come back again. You'd have to cancel it again. It doesn't do that, but they removed the ability to take it away with a button. So the X7 has a thing where it is quite back heavy unless you have a balancing ring on it or a heavier filter. So you can see it sits back heavy if I don't have something. Even with these little hoods that DJI makes, I would recommend getting yourself a thicker set of ND filters like these ones from B&W. We have a set of Format high-tech Firecrest filters, which are nice. They're great. They're thinner and they're lighter. But for the X7 specifically, these 46 mils, I would grab a set from B&W just because they're a thicker glass, they're heavier, and they help achieve a better balance on the X7. Okay, we've come to the final point. The flight time on the Inspire 2 was never incredible. It was never great. We always get about 16 to 18 minutes now per battery set. This is with about 80 cycles on every battery. Now these batteries are warranted to 200 cycles or 6 months from DJI, just to give you some perspective for how long they should last. We get 16 minutes. Now we are at over 1,000 meters or over 3,000 feet altitude, which does affect your flight time, but I believe the advertised flight time of the Inspire 2 is something like 21, 23, as high as maybe 27 minutes, depending what's going on, but we've never experienced more than about 20, 22 when the thing was brand new and all the batteries were new and absolutely best conditions. If you're running a camera and the thing is flying, it's working, it's climbing, it's moving around, you really can't get an amazing flight time out of the Inspire 2. Nothing like the easy 27 minutes that you could get out of like a Mavic Air. Those things fly forever, relatively, and for a huge professional system, it would be nice to have a little bit more, especially considering the cost of the batteries. But that's just one little nitpick of mine. So overall, customer service with an Inspire 2 is an absolute crapshoot. People encounter lots of semi-prevalent problems such as detaching motors or failing servos, like I mentioned, and sending your Inspire 2 into DJI, you don't really know what's going to happen or when you're going to get it back. Unfortunately, the Inspire 2 still feels like a bit of a gamble every single time you take it out of the box. Is there going to be interference? Will the thing stay connected, or will it even take off? These are questions that I have to ask myself every time I want to fly it, because I've had problems on different shoots, and even though the system is solid, it's not quite 100%. I've been filming with the Inspire 2 for the last couple days while working on this video, and I came across a couple more things that I figure should have made the cut. So the dual operator situation with the Inspire 2 works as sort of a 1-2-3 transmission. So the Inspire 2 transmits to the pilot remote, and then the pilot remote transmits that video signal to the cam op remote. Same thing when the cam op makes adjustments or makes stick inputs, those inputs are relayed to the pilot remote, and then that is relayed to the Inspire via this remote. So this remote runs out of battery faster, but also the problem is it's a Wi-Fi network between the two remotes, and that Wi-Fi network is not super reliable. It doesn't really penetrate buildings or walls that well, and even if you're outdoors, if you step more than about 20-30 feet away from your cam op, you'll lose that signal, which super sucks. So that's annoying. It can wreck a shot if your pilot is just trying to see where the drone is flying and your cam op is a little distance away. It can cut the signal and your cam op has no signal or no way to control the system. So second up, the stills recorded by the Inspire 2 go to the SD card, while all the high-res, like ProRes and RAW video footage goes to the CineSSD. CineSSD for reference. And I'm not really sure why the stills can't go to the CineSSD. I understand that you can operate the Inspire 2 without a CineSSD. You can operate the Inspire 2 without a CineSSD. You can shoot H.264, H.265, and DNG stills onto an SD card alone without one of these. But saving those DNGs to this, if it's plugged in, would be much faster, much more reliable, and it would save me having to take two different things out of the Inspire and load them into the computer to back up my files and work on them at the end of the day. Third up here, the stills with the Laowa 9mm. I love that lens, but I think I finally figured out. I had shot a bunch of stills with the Laowa 9mm. I did a full video on that right here. And the Laowa doesn't have the electronic controls. It doesn't have any electronics in it. And there is a physical, like a mechanical shutter that works in the X7. It makes sort of a click when you take a still, and that's not enabled because there are no electronics with the Laowa 9mm. And so when you take an exposure, basically it's expecting an electronic shutter to shut the exposure, but it doesn't do that. So any shots that you take with the Laowa 9mm are way overexposed. Here is a shot that we exposed pretty much properly, and it ended up being 2.5 stops overexposed, and we had to bring it back. Now, what is incredible is the dynamic range of the X7 in DNG stills allowed me to bring back 2.5 stops pretty much no problem. There was just two little bits of this image that were actually blown out. The rest was completely recoverable highlights, which is crazy. But just something to keep in mind, with the Laowa 9mm, the stills will be overexposed for sure, and you have to definitely run some tests to figure out how to get that going, because it won't be predictable at all like the other 4 DL mount lenses. The camera operator can't open battery details or modify any flight settings. on their remote. They have a limited menu where there's only options to modify the sticks, modify the camera settings. They can't see battery status, the cells, the voltage, anything like that. They also can't change anything about the flight performance of the Inspire. So that sort of makes sense. Your cam op doesn't need to adjust those things, but at the same time, the cam op gets a lot of notifications that don't really need to go to that remote, such as updating firmware, updating fly-safe maps, and a lot of like battery issues, return to home notifications. All of those things come up on the cam op remote, but if it's separate and it doesn't really have those privileges, it also doesn't really need that information. So if they're going to restrict you on what you can do, they should also sort of keep the cam op in the dark. Don't make them worry about all those different notifications. My cam op will say, oh, there's a battery error, and I'll say, that's okay, it's because I switched the batteries. You can go ahead and dismiss it. Okay, now the last thing. There is no hours counter. This is an interesting thing I came across yesterday while shooting. There's no hours counter on the Inspire. The Inspire doesn't really have any way, aside from you recording your flight time and the built-in flight logs, to really figure out how long that drone has actually been in the air. There's no hours counter built into the system. Let's say if you buy a system from somebody else, you can't see if it's been flown for 5 minutes, or maybe it's been in the air pretty much every day since it was purchased. Now the problem with that is there's no recommended maintenance to an Inspire 2. Typically, you might want to replace the motors for the bearings after a number of hours. Some people say maybe 100 hours, but the issue is you don't know how long it's been in the air, and DJI hasn't said when you should replace those motors, that type of thing. It's a really vague set of maintenance for the Inspire. Our maintenance includes checking that all the parts are tight, all the screws are tight, there's no cracks, there's no breaks, there's no loose any pieces like that, making sure everything is functioning. We do a hover test, we do full IMU and compass calibrations, but those are things that, aside from sort of just basic aircraft maintenance and checking the systems that we know exist, this is pretty much a maintenance list that I made up. It's not something that comes from DJI, such as when you have a commercial airliner like a Boeing or Airbus or something like that. It comes with a maintenance manual. Basically, do all of these things after a certain number of hours, and the aircraft will probably not fall out of the sky. DJI hasn't gone and made that same sort of guarantee, which leaves pilots like myself in the dark. What parts do you replace to guarantee that it might be safe and reliable for professional operations and operations in situations where you don't want to hurt anybody or damage anything? Anyway, back to the rest of the video that I filmed earlier. So there are lots of things that I still love about the Inspire 2. First of all, the stability. If you attach a GoPro to the arm of the Inspire 2, this thing is absolutely violent. It flies and it thrashes around and it makes adjustments, tiny little adjustments, and it makes them very, very quickly in order to maneuver itself. And the GoPro footage, if you watch it, watching the gimbal, the footage is absolutely it's tough to watch because it's so fast and rapid moving, but the smooth footage off of the X5S or X7 is so impressive and cinematic. It's really nuts how heavy the system is and how quickly it can move and still produce that great footage. The CineSSDs are still fast and sleek. Still love them. They make for fast offloads. It's really hard to mess this up, but it's a good form factor that just works pretty well. Like I said, I've been flying these for years, so I don't need a manual to know that the X7 native ISO is 400, that the system can fly down to minus 20 degrees Celsius and winds up to 36 kilometers an hour, and that shooting in 30p and slowing it down to 24 doesn't look as good as just shooting at 24 in the first place. The footage is clean, we have no problems with the DJI DL mount lenses, and systems from other manufacturers still struggle to keep up with what the Inspire 2 can accomplish. Despite of all of its downfalls, when a client asks me, what do you shoot on, and I say the Inspire 2 and X7, I'm still confident that it's the right choice. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot to us if you hit the subscribe button down below. My name is Arden for Yellowhouse Aerial, and I'll see you in the next video.